On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Kate Esterman. She is the Director of Global Talent Acquisition at Integral Ad Science. We're going to be talking about candidate experience. And I know we hear a lot about it, but I think in this case, it's going to be really interesting to talk about candidate experience and how market swings affect both the client and candidate side. Because obviously, when it's a candidate or client driven market, things change. That supply demand pendulum arc does shift. And obviously, the experience changes. And I think Kate's going to have some stories, examples, some practical takeaways. I'm super excited to have you on the show, Kate. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amir. It's great to be here. I'm excited to be here with you today.
Thank you. All right. Before we start, Integral Ad Science, I know it's also known as IAS. Tell us what you guys do over there.
Integral Ad Science, or IAS, is a company that helps make online ads work better using advanced technology like AI, for example, which is really at the core of our platform. But we work with some of the world's most recognizable brands like Coca-Cola and partner with major social platforms like TikTok and Meta of the world, just to ensure that ads are being seen by real people. They show up at the right places and help businesses get the most out of their advertising budgets. And our goal really is to set the standard for trust and safety in the digital advertising ecosystem. And I like to say we're fighting the good fight. One of the company's core values here is customer obsessed. So, I'm really excited to share how this principle guides us and talent acquisition team and creating, just exceptional candidate experience.
Awesome. All right. Well, it sounds like a place where you are definitely being kept busy. Let's dive into this topic. And I think, preface this is being recorded in October of 2024. So if anyone ever does go back and listen, and the context of when we talk about market swings, the last 2 years have been very, very hectic and hard for the talent world. The previous 2 years was the busiest. So we have seen this pendulum swing in very extreme ways. I guess when we talk about candidate experience, maybe this is a good starting point. Tell us what good candidate experience looks like from your point of view.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And you're absolutely right in terms of, the pendulum swinging. When I started at IAS, it was very much candidate driven. Everyone was hiring. So it was really hard to get candidates' attention or even to interview or engage them with our brand. Fast forward to, now, right? It is the complete opposite, where there is a surplus of talent, great talent in the market, and not enough roles to go around for everyone. But the candidate experience, no matter what candidates the market is in, my view on that is making sure that everyone walks away from your interview or conversation wanting to work for the company, whether they have gotten the job or not. It should be a consistent process, treating everyone the same and really thinking about, putting yourself in their shoes, right? If you're the one interviewing, how would you like to be treated?
And let's talk about that. So obviously, when times are good, and we saw that back in 21, 22, you just can't have enough recruiting hands to get to everyone. It's almost impossible. I mean, it's just very, very challenging. When times are not good, a lot of people are applying, and you don't have enough time or recruiting bandwidth to get to everyone. It's an interesting problem that I've thought about a lot of times where, the recruiting side, the talent side, as we see demand increase and supply shrinking, you just need more people to outreach. You need more people to keep people in touch. Then the flip side, when recruiters are let go, talent is being lowered headcount, a lot of RIFs. We're seeing tons of inbound, and then just not as many people around to go through those pipelines. And all of a sudden, people are saying, "I haven't heard back for 4 or 5 weeks," and it's really because there's just nobody really in talent to accommodate. This is a really complicated dynamic. I know why. Obviously, there's a financial reason behind it. But when it comes to candidate experience, and we are looking at this very fluid dynamic. How does the candidate walk away? Because they're applying, they don't know behind the scenes that talent is short right now. And 2 years ago, when candidates are being outreached and they feel like, well, they have a lot of options, they feel like, I have a little bit more control and power. And that's a difficult situation to kind of deal with. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I'll go into the candidate driven market first, right? So when 2 years ago, when there was just not enough candidates to go around for all the jobs we had open, I mean, and companies are going after the same candidates. They're probably reaching out to the same candidate over and over again, maybe 10 companies going after the same one. I get it, right? Candidates get interview fatigue. They don't have enough time to interview. I mean, let's be honest, it takes time to interview, hours to prep and carving time out from your day-to-day job. So, it's impossible to interview with every single company. So what we did at IAS was really turning a workforce into recruiters and getting them involved in recruiting. We've, look at, and candidates don't want to always want to hear from recruiters, right? They want to talk to the business. They want to talk to people that they're going to be working with. So we really tapped into that. One is really taking a look at who they know. Can they help us with outreach, coming in from a different angle, right? So that's one of the things that we did. And then to help incentivize that, we worked with leadership to look at doubling referral bonus payouts. A good example is that, so in Dublin, it's a new market for us. And for anyone who's ever recruited there, it's a very small talent pool. The size of the whole country is smaller than New York City, just to put it in scale. So we have had a very difficult time getting candidates engaged, but it's a very small and tight-knit community. So what we did there was really tapped into a local employee base by offering double the referral bonus payout for anyone who brings their friend into the door and get us introduced to their network. And that has really worked well for us in a way that just, thinking outside the box and really looking at it from a different angle when, the recruiting team has really just not been able to get the engagement. So, but I think when it comes to also candidate, driven markets, there's also a few things to it. It really boils down to, communicate early and often, I think, and just the transparency. When, candidates are interviewing with 5, 6, 7 companies, they want to know what to expect. So laying that up front, what the process is going to be, compensation, which has been a hot topic and a huge one. And just the last piece too is just speed and flexibility. Just having that agile process and be able to move quickly has been really the 3 things that has helped IAS win some great talent when it was super competitive, right? So I can dive a little deeper into the communicate and early and often and just leading with transparency. I think that's, like I said, especially on compensation, it's been such a hot topic, but you've already managed their expectation.
And I guess, if we were looking at the bigger picture of candidate experience long term, how much, and again, I don't know the stats on this, so maybe this is more anecdotal, but when you look at in the course of maybe your career, your team, you look at your team, how often do candidates come back into play, right? And the reason I'm asking this is we all talk about long term. Obviously, this experience is part of long term, and we never know when a candidate could be a fit again. So I guess when we're looking at the dynamic of, hey, this candidate, potentially not a fit now, could be a good fit 2 years, 3 years. How often are we actually working with that goal in mind? Because obviously we're in the heat of the job now, which is, a 4 week, a 6 week sprint, but we're maybe not thinking about the marathon. Is that the case? Should we be thinking about the longer term marathon of candidate experience and candidate fit?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And, I don't have stats top of mind, but that's a really good one, Amir, for me to look into. And that's going to be my takeaway after this. But anecdotally, I've actually had a few recruiters on my team who's spoken with a candidate and, they actually declined our offer the first time. This was years ago. We've continued to keep in touch with them. And 1.5, 2 years later, he messaged one of my recruiters and said, "Hey, we talked a few years back. I didn't accept the offer at that time, but I really enjoyed meeting you and everyone I interviewed with. Your culture and the interview process really spoke to me. So I would love to be reconsidered and go through the interview process again." And this was probably 2 years ago. This happened right when I started here, and he is still with us today, been promoted many times. But, I think it really just comes down to my recruiter, Kevin, on my team. He's great. He's all about candidate experience and making sure that everyone is treated well, and, continue to keep in touch with him and make sure that, he showcase, our values and our brand in the right way. And, kudos to him for leaving that impression, because now, we have this awesome engineer working on our team.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I don't have the stats either, so if you do see some statistics you want to share, we can always add them to the show notes. I think it's an interesting dialogue when we talk about candidate experience. And the reason I'm bringing this is now we're going a little bit left field, so sorry for diverging from the podcast, but we all talk about long term. We all talk about that candidate experience. We want it to be positive. I think the one thing I don't know is how many times we actually need those candidates back in the loop. I know they're valuable, and I know people are just aghast at me mentioning that we might not actually go back to these same candidates. And part of the reason I mention that is if we're not tracking and leveraging the database and we're going back to LinkedIn to look for somebody, we might never run into that candidate again. It might never ever come up. Or we have a case where the candidate wasn't a fit, was rejected. And then it's very hard to have another talent person come back and go through the rejected candidates and go, well, maybe they're fit now. Because that's even a more rare thing. And I look at all that and I go, yes, we talk about experience, but then in practical execution, if somebody does have stats, now I'm a data guy from my background, so now I'm just dying out of curiosity, but I'm really curious what percentage of candidates are candidates that come back into the fold that were rejected initially, that we had a conversation with and we just never pulled back in and might be fits.
That's a great question. Something that I definitely I'm curious now, just from speaking to you, to look into. But I think that it comes down to, right, making sure that we have a good CRM in place, and making sure operationally we can find those candidates again. So on our team, my sourcer owns that piece, right? And we before we kick when we kick up any search, that's the first place we look at is our CRM, looking at folks we've spoken with in the past. And we do a good job of, tagging them, making sure using, the tags in Greenhouse or whatever CRM you use, right, to make sure that we keep those candidates on file and know exactly where to go for it. But that's where we start, is typically your going there first place before we kick up any search.
Absolutely. Now that I love to hear that. And I think that's where, obviously when we talk about candidate experience and we're talking about the long term, I think we really are trying to say we want to cultivate our own talent pool so that we can go back, right? And I think the bigger maybe question for me sometimes is, how many candidates do you really need in your universe so that you have a well hydrated long term pipeline of warm candidates, right? And do you need 1,000? Do you need, let's say, if you're hot looking for a DevOps engineer in San Francisco, you need 200-300 that you're keeping warm, you're keeping in contact with, and when the hiring time comes, they're familiar with you and your brand. Do we need to keep track of the entire universe? Because obviously that even becomes a bigger challenge. And maybe my final question to you, and I know you got to get back to it, is when we think about candidate experience and we're thinking about these long-term goals, do we need to think a little bit more about the engaged community aspect of talent acquisition, talent engagement, and not necessarily some of the nuts and bolts? Like some of that, we need to actually have a way to keep them interested and aware of us, because obviously in 3 years, they might forget we even existed.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of engagement, and I'm going to pick on, Dublin again, because it's such a great market to, in terms of keeping in touch and keeping engaged, because they're so small. There's not enough of them to go around. And especially if you're a company like us, where we're looking for something super specific, right? Really, it's only hundreds of people within that community that has the skill set that we're looking for. And, that's another topic we need to also expand on, looking at, other relevant skill set as well. But to your point, the way we keep candidates engaged in that piece, right? 2 years from now, we're not just thinking about roles we need to fill tomorrow. Every conversation that we have, we're thinking of this long term. So it's not just direct sourcing or speaking to candidates inbounds. We're doing events, hosting meetups to keep our brand relevant and top of mind. Even though we're not hiring for a role right now, right? We want to be a brand where when candidates do go look for a job, they think of us. So for Dublin, especially with that market, and again, another point here too is just, every region is different. So, flexibility is key and not one size fits all. So for strategy for hiring in that market, it's really been, not just outreach and inbound, but also doing a lot of brand building, hosting meetups, staying engaged with the community, sponsorship, and really just getting our name out there.
Fantastic episode. I know I kind of slightly derailed us by asking
That's okay.
Crazy questions, left field, but you got me thinking, and I feel like maybe I'll have to wait for you to come back or go do some digging on my own. But now I'm curious, and that's always a good thing. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
If someone's going to want to touch base with you, obviously the core of the conversation around candidate experience, is there a good way of getting a hold of you to kind of follow up with anything you mentioned on the show?
Yeah, sure. You can always find me on LinkedIn, Kate Esterman, and feel free to email me, and happy to chat further.
Okay. I love it. We will make sure to include that in the show notes. Kate, again, thank you for being on. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks, Amir. Great seeing you as always.
Absolutely. All right. That's the end of the episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, the topic of candidate experience. I think Kate is a fantastic expert to talk on this subject. She had great examples, great insights. I think she had a lot to share. And I hope you guys share this with other people that are in the space that want to talk about candidate experience. I don't think there's a ending to this discussion. So hopefully this is a way for us to kind of talk a little bit more about, honestly, how to just deal with experience in all markets. And I think it's challenging for every talent professional. So please reach out to Kate also if you do have a question. I'm sure she has some further insights, and I didn't get to cover everything in the time I had with her, but I appreciate that and Kate's time. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.